There's nothing like a good trend to just absolutely drive me crazy. Don't get me wrong, I've fallen for my fair share of trends no matter how much I've tried to resist. I'm sure some of you may have as well. I want to talk about the most overrated leather and 3 better options that you could choose. Let's start with a couple honorable mentions. The first one's going to be the Merriam Tannery's Horse Rump TPR leather. To be honest, I actually really like the way that this looks, and that's part of the problem. If you ask me, I would much prefer just a normal like vegetable tanned horse butt. Let the shoemaker do the finishing. The resin finish really kind of creates a lot of like uniformity across the top layer of the leather. It also creates a very like high luster look, almost like reminiscent of shell cordovan, but it's obviously not shell cordovan. I just don't like the idea of finishing the leather with, you know, a resin to create a characteristic that's not inherent to that animal or that leather tanning process. Another honorable mention I want to touch on is Chromexcel or Cavalier. Honestly, like those are both fantastic leathers. One of the common through lines here you're going to see is just the fact that these things get overused. Folks just like complain about them all the time because, you know, they're not really used in the most optimal use cases that the material is intended for. With Chromexcel, it's a fantastic like high wax pull-up leather. With Cavalier, it shares a lot of the same like base tanned properties, which actually share the same like base tannage as shell cordovan at the Horween Tannery. That said, like the cracking and the spidering effect that you get both on Cavalier as well as CXL, you may not get it on every pair, but it's pretty common. Maybe it's due to how popular the leathers become and just kind of the onslaught of orders that the tanneries have to deal with, but that is just not a very desirable characteristic for me, and for that reason, it's one of the most overrated. Here's my pair of Crown Northampton Evertons, which is in a navy or ink, I believe it's called Cavalier leather. Honestly, I think they look pretty good, but like just up close, like the creasing is just it's just not very pleasing to look at. And then as you go up, you know, into the rest of the upper, it just has like a very, you know, it's not a very like elegant leather to look at. Even though this is on a sneaker, it's just kind of like, you know, I don't know. There's nothing wrong with this. It's just this is like the characteristic of the leather. I'm not a fan of it. On a similar topic there, I know a lot of folks have been asking me about an update or like a review, long-term review on my Crown Northampton Evertons. While I wasn't like super thrilled with that, I've got a pair of Color 8 Evertons here that I absolutely love. Stay tuned, more for that. This is not overrated at all. I absolutely love these. The most overrated leather, in my opinion, is hatch grain. That could range anything from the Utah calf, which is very popular in the Edward Green world. This is a pair from Ichigo though. To the Horween hatch grain, the Pioneer from Horween, or the JF&J Baker replica Russian reindeer, which is an absolute mouthful to say, but I almost like saying that as much as I like saying Ichigo. The reason that this is, in my opinion, the most overrated is because it's just become so over-popularized and overused all the way, you know, throughout the entire spectrum of the market, from the entry-level shoes all the way up to, you know, bespoke shoes. Now, when we talk about the characteristics of hatch grain leather, one of the reasons that it becomes like a candidate for hatch grain leather or any embossed leather is because there's something about that hide that makes it so it can't really be sold as just a regular smooth calfskin or horsehide or whatever it is that they end up embossing. One of the things is like this creasing pattern that you'll see is fairly common with embossed leathers. It doesn't happen on every pair, but it happens more often than on smooth leathers, let's say. Kind of, you know, the luck of the draw sometimes with these types of things. And the more and more that these types of leathers get used, the more and more you're going to see some less desirable characteristics kind of like come through in those leathers. Now I want to talk about the better alternatives that you can get instead of a hatch grain leather. And that's going to be any of these like natural grains. When you look at the natural grains, the texture that you're seeing here is pretty close to just like what the texture result of the tanning process is for these different types of animals. Those properties are going to be significantly different. This is a pair of Belgian loafers, which has a shark vamp and a kudu upper. This is also a kudu upper, and you can see that this is an extremely rich and heavy texture. When we get into the more subtle options of the natural grains, this is an example of peccary leather or wild boar, which I know are two different animals, but just kind of flow with the conversation here. those skins are both going to look very, very similar on the foot from, you know, a distance apart. The natural texture in this is going to be very, very fine, and it's going to create like just a lot of depth in the leather. It's not going to stand out too much as this like kudu leather is, but probably on a very similar level of texture as you would see in these like hatch grain options. If you're looking for something even like more subtle, this is camel leather. This is extremely durable. It could almost pass as like a smooth leather from afar, but once you kind of get really close up, you can see this extremely fine texture throughout. And it's not a uniform texture because this is a natural texture. It's a natural skin, and you know, not every pore or every grain structure that comes out of it is going to be the same. But that's one of the beauties of the natural textures, is that each hide is going to be unique from the other, as opposed to kind of a stamping of a metal plate on top of an embossed leather. That could be buffalo, could be elephant, camel, wild boar, kudu, shark, you name it. There's a huge range of naturally textured leathers to choose from, and I would highly recommend, if you're looking at an embossed leather, hold off and go for the naturally textured leather. If I had to pick just one out of all the naturally textured leathers, I think kudu is the most unique. It's the most substantial, robust, resilient. If you've never tried it before, you don't have to get it from Antonio Mecariello. I know this boot kind of commands quite the budget. Some of us may not have the budget or want to have the budget. There are many shoemakers that offer kudu leather, so if you're interested in something like this textured and this substantial, I highly recommend you try it out. I think you'd really like it. Let me know what you think the most overrated leather is, and thanks. I'll see y'all soon, guys.